Welcome to the Eat, Play, Love Summer Series. I'm Sandra, Elia, Director of Education and Patient Advocacy here at Obesity Matters. Meet my co-host, Rachel Atkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, Director of Strategy with Obesity Matters.
Obesity Matters is a nonprofit organization for people living with elevated weight and obesity. It was formed by patient advocates whose focus is to provide evidence-based education and advocate for public policy. Sorry, my screen went blank there for a minute, but it came back. And environmental changes that enable well-being. If we can do that, we are one step closer to the acceptance and inclusion of millions of people in larger bodies. Obesity is a medical condition, and we hope that this knowledge empowers you to release any shame and guilt you may be carrying. There are many contributors outside of your control that cause obesity. We here at Obesity Matters are bringing together a community of seekers, open to finding a solution aimed at healing the mind, body, and spirit. Together, we'll create a community of enlightened and connected people who nourish, love, and accept our bodies. To get connected, please visit our website at obesity-matters.com. The first half of the episode is an interview, and then we turn the spotlight on you to address your questions and your comments in a safe and supportive environment. Today's session, our topic is let's look at what I'm eating. And our guest is Dr. Jeff Alfonsi. Jeff, please introduce yourself and let us know about the work that you're doing and what motivated you to get involved in obesity management.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me here. I think the work that you're doing is so important. So I just want to start by that acknowledgement. So, I'm actually, I started as an internal medicine physician. I did extra training in something called clinical pharmacology, toxicology. And I actually was getting referred people that had, high blood pressure, diabetes, that couldn't tolerate medications. And can you do genetic tests to figure out the right drug? And at the end of the day, I think I came back to what is the root cause in the first place? And, I'm not saying we don't ever need medication, but are there ways that we can look at things more holistically? So I did extra training in obesity medicine and lifestyle medicine. And this has been kind of an important part of what I think. And also the last thing that kind of bringing things together is I've done a lot of work. I did engineering before this. I was interested in technology and virtual care, even prior to the pandemic. And so I think we have to find that balance of how do we bring technology in to help us empower ourselves, figure out what's right, and to make change. So again, really happy to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. I really love what you're up to. So to start out here, let's go down the route of, diet culture, which we know is very pervasive. And I think because there's so much out there, it can actually make it quite confusing as well. And unlike things like height, it's also very difficult to measure. So, thinking of dieting, when is it important to actually measure our diet, and when should we avoid measuring our diet?
For sure. And I think, it comes back like anything. We are a culture in general that measures a lot of things, right? We may measure the time of day, how long it takes to get somewhere, how long we exercise. There's all sorts of measurements, and medicine and the research community and science obviously has to focus on measurement to make changes. So measurement has a great value in terms of being able to have that data to make change. But, it is also a double-edged sword in some ways, because sometimes we can generate data that we don't want. And what I mean by that, sometimes we generate too much data. Sometimes we generate data we don't know what to do with. And sometimes we measure stuff that actually makes us feel worse and is actually not helpful. So I think the fundamental question is, if when it comes to kind of how we eat, we have to kind of personally set what we want to measure in that. And so what that comes down to is, I think universally there's value in understanding how we eat. I think, it can reduce, cancer risk, metabolic conditions of all types, reduce, kind of prevent or treat conditions. And our chronic disease guidelines all talk about medical nutrition therapy and the value of them. And so you want to make sure that we get that appropriate intake for us. But again, there are times where sometimes measuring things can be bad for us. And, one example is if someone, is struggling with an eating disorder, sometimes we have to be careful about what we're measuring, because it can make things worse. It doesn't mean that you can't use it or actually have some we work with the sick kids, and we actually have a number of people that are kind of at different stages of their eating disorders, that which sometimes just can help if you measure the right things, but you have to know when and what, and that's it. So at the end of the day, I think it always comes down to, if I'm going to measure something, one, can I somewhat accurately get that without being too difficult for me? And two, is this going to be valuable to me? Can I use this information or with my clinical team to make change, and it make sure that it's not going to cause harm or confusion or anxiety around it? So really, that's kind of the fundamental point about measuring. And then we always come back to the fact that once you measure something, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with that data? And there's a whole bunch of information out there that comes to how we eat nutrition that can get very confusing. And that's where you may need help for someone to say, if I do measure this, or what is my plan for what matters to me? And I think that's really the key point is, measuring, especially how we eat, should be personal, maybe done in collaboration with other healthcare professionals, and you kind of come up with your plan.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jeff, on that point about measuring our diet, right? So if we are measuring together data, that is very different from measuring our diet and then using it as a weapon to shame ourselves, or think, how could, why did I do that? Or it could have been better. I love that distinction as a data gathering tool. So my next question to you is, what aspects of my diet are most important to make a difference in my health? Like, what should I be focusing on?
Definitely. Yeah. And this is obviously a huge topic. It's an evolving topic. I think some of the key takeaways is it's probably a bit more personal, right? To some extent, it has to factor in your own personal beliefs, what you eat, your medical conditions. And on average, when you look at the data, just to put things out there, people probably track somewhere between 10 and 40 different foods a day. So that also can come into things. But I think at the end of the day, there's a few somewhat core concepts that I think can apply to most people. Some, and also might change over time. What you measure might change over time. It's a journey. Oftentimes people may start by just saying, look, I don't eat regularly. I get in trouble because I skipped lunch. I ate a huge dinner because I was hungry. So maybe it is, how would I just track when I am eating? Am I setting a goal to eat 2 meals a snack or 3 meals a snack? And am I just doing that? And so your measurement could be as simple as, do I eat regularly? And of course that can evolve. It may also be, how am I feeling when I eat? Did I feel hungry before? Do I feel stressed? Do I feel anxious? How do I feel after I eat? So sometimes you may just just track that basic stuff, and that can be really valuable to guide what your next steps are. And then of course we can think about things like Obesity Canada guidelines. There's a whole section on medical nutrition therapy. So we may want to measure aspects of that, which are going to help with our treatment in collaboration with our broader care. And so it could be, am I following a calorie restricted diet, in which case calories may matter. Or there may be some general kind of diet scores. I think they list a number of different diets, a Mediterranean, a DASH, Ornish diet. So how do I might just track how closely I am meeting that diet. And they're actually, for some of the bigger scores like Mediterranean diet, DASH score, people have published different ways that you can estimate how closely you meet that diet. And so we'll get at, if you can track things in the right format, you can start getting that really neat feedback on how you're doing there. But kind of the last point I'll probably touch on is, I do think there are some universal truths as close as you can get to that in diet that are worth considering. We seem to have good information that we should be mindful of the ultra processed foods that we eat and the sugary beverages, so we should just know how much of that we're eating, where is that coming in our diet, and what are my plans to maybe reduce that or set targets on what that right balance is for me. I think making sure we have an adequate amount of fruits and vegetables, pretty consistent value. So what percentage on my plate, for example, do I want to have? Having a good protein variety, so not eating just red meat, for example. Choosing whole grains over refined grains, and making sure I have adequate fiber. So there's some fundamentals, I think, that are spanned across these good diets. And so these may be some specific things that you want to do because we've seen value in them. But again, what I think everyone can value, or in many cases, you can find the right things to measure that are going to add value to you. And so that's kind of just a summary of what we're looking for in terms of how it's going to affect your health.
Well, Jeff, I think I might be that person that probably collects a whole bunch of data, but doesn't actually do anything with it, because I'm envisioning all of these Excel spreadsheets now. But you know, are there specific tools, or is there a certain way that we can, you know, help, you know, our thinking in terms of guiding us to what are the important questions to ask? And then what do we do with that data? So how do we manage all of this? Because it sounds a little complex.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where it comes back to the fundamental question of, what do I want to track? And it's definitely okay to get help, see a dietitian, see a doctor, see a specialist, whoever that might be, that helps you figure out what is the right thing for me to measure. And then how am I going to measure it? And so, fundamentally, there's a couple ways that we can measure. I think it all comes down to kind of an effort and accuracy output, right? We can be extremely detailed, spend all this time, all this energy. There are laboratory-based methods, things called doubly labeled water, or measuring nutrients in your urine or blood and biomarkers, and you can be extremely precise, but they're obviously not practical and they're expensive. So, we have to find that balance of what can I do easily. And so, traditionally, there's been things like paper logs where you might, recall how you ate for the 24 hours, or talk to someone through a history, or fill out a frequency questionnaire. How often do I eat foods? And so there's all these different ways that you can track things. But, more recently, we've shifted towards finding technologies that can facilitate this. And I think there's a lot of advantages to technologies because they make it much easier and convenient, and they digitize things right away to do analysis on it. And they kind of get closer to that lower effort, but still some pretty good accuracy. And so there's been a big explosion around these digital dietary assessments. And I'll show you a bit about one shortly, but these might be kind of AI based, or they might be less AI based. And they may even do some really cool things with other sensors on the phone. Things like you may have heard called LiDAR, or if you've got multiple cameras, you can start estimating volumes and sizes, so you can recognize, you can size. And that kind of simple one step, take a photo, get data, reduces some of the barriers to do it. And then when you digitize that data, you can filter out what matters to you. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what it is. So what I'm going to do here, I'll just share. So, just for disclosure reasons, I did create this product called RX Food. And so I'm going to show that it is a dietary analysis, but it's definitely not the only one out there. I think, and what it does is it really focuses on making it extremely simple to track food. And so what you'll see here is, you would literally just hit a button and take a photo. And this is just on a simulator. So I just have to do it slightly different, and you're going to see some funny stock photos, but pretend this is, taking a picture of your lunch. It's going to automatically assume the time of day. You're just going to tell us how many items are in there for the sake of the algorithm, and you add a note, and then you would add to meal. And that's literally all that you have to do. And then you log your meal. And so it's super simple. You can write text, you can dictate, but the idea is we need ways that simplify how we get data in. And then in this case, we're depending a lot on the technology to be able to analyze that and make sure that it gets the right data out of it. But, I think if we make that easy, and technology can do that, it's really great. And you can also kind of log other things like how you're feeling or your emotion around that, your water tracking. So there may be other aspects of your diet, but the key ideas here is, technology is really allowing us to measure things in a much easier way. And to kind of build on that then is, to your second part of the question, once we have that digitized food data, the question is, what do we want to look at? What do we want to do? And that also is an ongoing area, I think, of interest. So first of all, what can we extract from these photos and these types of input methods? And then how do we kind of present that? And I think it really comes down to looking at kind of a fundamental aspect around the kind of the macro, the composition, but also the quality of what we eat. So, this is just one example. So I do use this with my patients. I ask them to do a 3-day food log, 3-day photo journal, and then it gives me some insight into how they're eating. And so, it might vary. This might, and I might pick different sections, but it might be, how are you eating throughout the day? To that point is, do I just want to make sure you eat regularly? It might be, what does your plate look like? So I can actually estimate the yellow is your grains, you have your fruits in red, your protein in blue. Like what is your plate looking like? And should we be looking at ways to increase your vegetables or your fruits at certain meals? Because that just might be a nudge towards a healthier diet. And I think that's kind of a key point here is we want to focus on kind of working together, defining what we want to measure, what we want to change, and what's sustainable over the long term that's going to be valuable to it. So this might be a great example of just, the food guide talks about making your plate half vegetables and a quarter grain. So can we just use these visuals to set some goals and objectives? We may talk about your macro distribution, maybe depending on the diet that's being followed. I'm a big fan of quality metrics. So I may look and say, look, you're eating a lot of refined grains and red over whole grains. Here's some of the refined grains you ate. Can we swap some of these out? Or how are you doing for your fiber? So kind of collectively, when we have this data, you can present it in all sorts of different ways, around protein types, fat types, are you drinking a lot of sugary beverages or alcohol? I particularly like this star plot where we kind of pick those kind of 5 almost universal metrics and see how do we push this out to make a biggest circle as possible. Or maybe we hone in on some iron capacity, what's your iron like? So again, I think once we digitize things, you can present the data in all sorts of practical ways. And that lets us kind of get at kind of personalizing goals. And at the end of the day, that's it. How do we make this data drive change that's healthy, that's sustainable, and that's lasting?
Yeah, that looks amazing. I love the interface. I guess, my question would be sort of back to one of the things that we already talked about, which was, there's certainly some scenarios where it's maybe not a healthy thing to do to be measuring your diet. And putting those scenarios aside though, with an app and other tools similar to what you just showed us, is there this idea that it's something you'd have to measure every day, sometimes even multiple times a day? Could it be something that you do once a week so that it doesn't become like this sort of addiction almost?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. And I think in general, it does not have to be every day. And I think it probably comes down to be personal again. Some people, probably 20% of people love tracking stuff, track every day. And there is some data in the obesity literature that says if you do track, sometimes you're more mindful and it can support weight maintenance and weight loss. So there are definitely times where that might be right. But I think the vast majority of people do not want to log every day. I myself will do stints of it where I might say, okay, I'm going to log for 3 days or 7 days. I'm going to get this feedback. I'm going to take 1 or 2 months off. I'm going to work on some stuff and then I'm going to measure it again. Or, what, I've actually noticed I'm not feeling as well. Maybe I'm not doing as well. I'm going to recheck maybe I'll get some feedback that I've forgotten about. So I think you kind of do these intermittent measures is important. And at the end of the day, you're trying to approximate. And so as many data points that you can get, as many days that you can measure, you're going to get more precise to probably how you're eating, but you want to balance that with something that you're actually going to do and that matters. So that's it. The other interesting point though is that your eating, the way you eat may change for a couple of reasons. It may change over time if you're trying new things. It may change by the season, what's available in the grocery store, where stress level is like. So you're going to have these kind of long-term changes, these short-term fluctuations. And even just seeing how the season may be changing things, it can make you mindful about how do I prepare in the summer, maybe with things so that in the winter I can deal with it. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you may want to measure different sample from different periods so that you get that picture. So
yeah, I really liked that interface where you ask people, how are they feeling? Right? Are they tired? Do you capture any of the emotions around eating?
Yeah, and that's so really I kind of leave that for the person just to kind of anytime they check in and they say, this is how I'm feeling. And that question might change a little bit depending on who I'm seeing. But the idea is you're right. It is important to know how are you feeling before, how are you feeling after, or what's the day going like? And I think that is an important part. And oftentimes it's the individual patient, I think, that gets the value to that because they can see how they were feeling and then what maybe they did with it. And then we can talk through those strategies about, if you feel that way again, what might you do about it, or how might you try, or you did a great job this time, let's keep doing that. So I do think that there's so many factors and I want people to be aware of that even if you didn't sleep well, maybe you track that and I didn't eat as well today because I didn't sleep and I was tired or I was stressed. So all of these things are really important. And when you're measuring it, I think if we get too caught up again just on the numbers, we miss all the stuff going around it. And so you have to find that balance of what other things are related to how I'm eating that are important for me to know, so I can make those kind of behavior changes and plan around it.
Yeah, I could see myself using this kind of tool to understand my patterns and understand my high risk times, understand when things don't work out for me, and trying to connect all the dots. So I think that could be a really powerful tool. We ask this of all of our guests. How can Obesity Matters, what can we do as an advocacy group to potentially improve the health and well-being of our community?
Yeah, and you know, Virgil, again, as I said at the beginning, I think the work you're doing is so important. I think we've made a lot of gains in helping everyone understand that obesity is a complex, chronic condition, right? So I think that's so important, and you're doing a great job making sure that people are aware of that message. And that goes from, you know, individuals maybe living with obesity to physicians, and just like everyone needs to be aware of this and to change that mindset. It's not simple calories in, calories out, or exercise. Like, it's not that simple. There's so much to it. And I think we need the voice that you have. So keep doing that voice. That's really important. From kind of my kind of focus today, I think obviously I'm a big fan in medical nutrition therapy, how we eat. And I think, you know, that it's a big part of the Obesity Canada guidelines. But sometimes people have trouble accessing medical nutrition therapy, dietitians. And so continuing to support that access is important, support education for that, because it is part of that holistic care. And so, and even just, yeah, I think, so that's it. I really think that's really important work. Those are probably the two things I'd ask to keep doing and to promote.
Thank you so much. So the floor is now open for audience questions. We're going to alternate between live questions and ones in the chat box. And I've seen a ton come through the chat box in order of relevance. We encourage you to turn on your camera when you're ready to ask a question, introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from. So you can raise your hand in the Zoom feature, and we're ready to go. So we already have a raised hand. Stephen, introduce yourself. Let us know where you're tuning in from.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steven, a family dog from Malaysia. And nice to see you here, Jeff. This is the first time I'm listening to your talk. Very interesting. And you have an interesting background from internist, become lifestyle physician, then obesity physician, and now a tech enthusiast. And my question is that just now you mentioned about recording of our diet diary is not suitable for certain eating disorders. Perhaps you can tell me what are the eating disorder that's contraindicated, and also maybe you have personal experience of these disaster cases so we can learn from it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I think just, I know maybe Sandra, others may weigh into this just with their experience. So, and fortunately there are no disasters. It's just something that, you know, anytime someone has struggled, I think with any eating disorder, there's times where significant anxiety can be worked up around food. And so when you're tracking that food and you're seeing, especially the wrong information, the numbers, that can push people into a bad position and trigger or re-trigger kind of a serious state of their eating disorder. So I think that's the fundamental point. The one thing that, you know, we've worked very closely with in developing this, people that kind of treat or manage people with eating disorders. And one of the key parameters that came up was by default, there's no numbers that come onto the app. We don't give people any calories, nothing, because we want them just to see, oh, I'm eating right. So we want to minimize that, and that's helpful. But I will say we had a case where we had a push alert come through in one patient, and it caused some anxiety. And luckily she was seeing the clinician next day. We talked through it, we fixed it. But even a push alert in the wrong case can trigger people. So you have to be very mindful of what we track and what we present back to people. You know, I do think, though, there's still value in it may help people in certain cases, right? So it's not, you don't use it. I wouldn't say there's any absolute contraindications, but you just have to be mindful of that risk of causing a trigger or exacerbation. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I agree with you. I think when it is used as a data collecting tool, that's really great. But for a lot of us, and I'm sure maybe the people tuning in can let me know if they can relate to this, but using it as a way, I'm going to track when I'm eating perfectly, and then when I'm not eating perfectly, I'm in shame, so I'm going to abandon the tool and not get that information, or using it as a way to really shame myself. I think that's when we get into dangerous territory. But this tool seems to be presenting itself as a data collection tool. I like the idea that there's no calories. I was on an app once that it pushed an alert that I had eaten too many calories, and it did trigger me. I have to be honest. I was really upset by that. I felt like I was being shamed by my iPhone. So I'm glad that you're very sensitive to those topics. We have another raised hand, and then we'll go to the chat box.
Jeff, can I add on? Sorry, Jeff, thank you very much for the fantastic app. I love the idea of moving away from numbers, just like our fundamental in obesity medicine, to move away from kilo. And your apps actually move away from kilocalorie. Fantastic. I really love it. And just now I go and have a look. It seems that it needs to be given by, if you want to use the app, you must be given by a doctor, right?
Yeah, we're just kind of controlling it for safety, all this stuff, but we can chat offline and we can talk about how to get you access. So for anyone, I know someone else mentioned that too. And like I said, just because we're trying to make sure we do this safe, right? But like I said, I can share my contact. We can talk about it offline.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to go ahead, introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling in from?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
So I'm calling from Vancouver, Canada. Nice to meet you, Jeff. Excellent presentation. My question to you is how I realize that you have a background in biodesign. I looked at your LinkedIn profile there. And so how did that help you to actually create an app that is patient-centric or customer-centric for that matter? And how do you actually, can you share with us what are the health outcomes with the app, and maybe give us a little bit of a history, like here's what we discovered in the last 3 years, that the top 3 amazing things that we didn't even think would be so interesting to help us moving the needle.
Oh yeah, and thank you for those questions. Very thoughtful. So yeah, I think design is super important in anything we do, right? That you have to think about, and I think we've spent a lot of time looking at the user, so the individual using it, the clinical team, the data, that it has to be like the core principles is if I can't log easily, I'm not going to log. We know that. The next thing is if I can't get data back from logging that's valuable to me, why do I log? And that gets into making sure it's accurate and 100%. So without having those design principles, and we spend a ton of time getting feedback from users, from clinical team, like that is so important. And we're always refining it. And, like I said, I still think we can do more and more there, but those are fundamental. You won't have a successful product that's used if you don't focus on those design principles. We did do some randomized control trials on this. And actually in those, living with type 1 diabetes that use the app for 3 months, we actually focuses on a very specific use case. Can we help you carb your carbohydrates better because you're dosing your insulin to that? And we actually found that in the research study, we really focused on people's ability after using the app for 3 months. Did they learn to count carbohydrates more accurately? And they actually did, compared to just the standard care group. And more importantly, their A1C improved. There was a 0.8% improvement in the A1C in those. So that's on par with a medication based on the fact that they could count their carbs better. So this is an example that I think we showed is valuable in kind of more real world, so less rigorously. I've used it for people in my practice. I've seen improvements in a small group, a 7.8% loss in their weight as part of like lifestyle training with this app, no medications though. And we've also seen it for some cardiovascular disease. We have the cardiologist we work with in terms of reducing people's risk. So I think there's lots of different use cases, and we continue to build more data on it. Probably just maybe the summary about the lessons learned. So one, we have to do what people are willing to do. And that's to the point why we design this as, most likely people are going to do 3 days and want to break. Like, so we really had to understand kind of that psychology. That was like a big part. The second point is those graphs I showed you, we keep iterating them. How do people want to see information? And even now, some people say, this is a little too complex. So how do we make it so easy that you get the best information that you can? So those are kind of the fundamentals we're working at right now. And I guess maybe the third thing is we're actually trying to see how close does this work to like a weighted 3-day food log, which is used in the research world. So we actually have research going on where we're comparing like one of the best ways we have to track food to technology. How close is it? So those are like, I think, all important parameters to making sure this continues to be effective and beneficial.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rosie, do we have any questions from the chat box?
Hi, thank you, Sandra. Yes, we do. We received a direct message from someone who says, I have type 2 diabetes and I also have IBS. With IBS, it is difficult to eat high fiber foods that are important in a healthier diet. I have issues with many fruits and some vegetables as well that I have to avoid, so it does limit my options. Any suggestions or experience with others who might have this combo?
That is a really good question. And, at high level, this is, and no, I wish I gave, this is often where I defer to my dietitian call. We have a bunch of dietitians we work with, and I often ask them for their help in this case, because I kind of have the big picture aspects of what to eat. But really, when it comes down to it, we need more help. Maybe from a measurement perspective, though, this is an example where, you've probably already started to think about the foods that you can tolerate. And so one of the things that I've done and we've done is we actually kind of might go through our database, or there's a couple of things we might say, look, what can you eat? And then we've designed our database. We might do like a reverse search to help you. So we know all the foods that are in a similar category to that food, and then we can sort them by like highest fiber and other scores. And then we may be able to like suggest, here's some foods you can try. And then maybe you say, I've tried them, they didn't work, or you do other things for it. So it really comes down to, I think, trying to figure out what you can tolerate, and then looking at foods that may have some similarity between them, that are higher in fiber, right? And so I don't, at least not in my opinion, I don't have a magic bullet to do this. I do think this is an example you probably just need to spend a bit more time. But again, measurement, it can be really helpful for you to kind of drill down on the foods, and then looking at those foods with the highest fiber and trying to maximize those within your diet. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that.
Oh, that's great. Rosie, we'll continue on with the chat box.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question from Cindy Getz. I'm having a hard time understanding the science behind calories in, calories out. I'm struggling to lose even a pound a week. I eat 1,000 calories a day, which is a 1,500 calorie deficit. I'm also in ketosis. How do I address this?
Yeah, and I think that goes to the one of the key principles of what Obesity Matters is getting at, is that it is not just calories in, calories out, right? Obesity is a complicated condition, and hormones are changing, and they're going to kind of defend a certain set point or a weight point. And so all of these are challenges that work against you. And so it sounds like you've got a pretty aggressive kind of diet, focusing on a pretty significant calorie restriction, quite high ketosis. So, I think when you get to that level, I would just make sure that you do have someone monitoring you, because it's important. But, maybe it's aspects, maybe you're doing what you can in diet, and you have to look at other aspects. This is there's multiple pillars of treatment, right? So maybe this is where I have to say, okay, make sure my physical activity is up, make sure maybe a pharmacotherapy or a surgery, so I think to the point is, I think understanding how we eat is super important. It's going to help in many ways, but it's not going to fix everything. The other point to bring up is you may be getting additional benefit to your dietary changes in terms of cardiovascular disease, lipid control, glucose control, that aren't always measured by changes on your scale, right? So I think that's another key message, is that it's always important to kind of think about your diet, because it's going to add additional benefits, but that may not always come through the scale. So like I said, in this case, I think it's probably, I don't know if I would push much more around your diet changes, just because they are fairly kind of restricted, or pretty intense treatment already. And it would be a matter of kind of seeking maybe that broader obesity specialist to look at all the pictures and see what else can augment this.
Great. Rosie, we'll take one more from the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question from Kathleen Budd. She asks, can our local dietitian help with analyzing data, or do we need to seek out a medical nutrition specialist?
No, I think so. Medical nutrition therapy is the term that we use, but it's dietitians are obviously, this is their core, their strength. So again, I just use that. That's what kind of the exact wording that's done in Obesity Canada and some of the other guidelines. But 100% anybody, I think sometimes an individual without medical training may be able to get some of that. Sometimes you have a dietitian, sometimes you have a physician. So I think the whole point is to get stuff that I think is strong, it's valuable, it's evidence-based. But I think you have a lot of people that you can turn to guide you to make those right decisions.
So I got a personal message just to me, and it says, the person says, I have 3rd or 4th stage cirrhosis of the liver, and my hepatologist is requiring me to lose 20 pounds so she can get me off metformin. She says I shouldn't come back if I do not lose the weight. My appointment is this month, and I'm nowhere near losing 20 pounds. What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. And I think in general, we generally want to discourage rapid weight loss. 20 pounds a month would be considered a lot. There are high risks to that. There's also risk of rebounds or regaining. It's tough. I don't know exactly the conversation that happened there. I mean, I think in my opinion, if you've lost some weight, if you're trying, if you've made change, if you've seen an improvement, to me, I think that's important. I don't think it has to be a magic number of 20, because to this point, your body's set point might not be there. It may be almost impossible for you to get there. And so I think we have to be cognizant, but I do acknowledge the fact that diet may be a contributor to the cause of your cirrhosis, and changing that is going to be hugely valuable as a treatment strategy. But, all I would say is, I don't think it's fair to give a number like that to you in general. Again, I don't know the whole picture, but I would say it's unfair to make you have to hit that target, and especially on short notice. So, I wouldn't get discouraged as long as you're working hard and you're showing improvement. I think that is what matters. And that would be the messaging that I would take back and try to advocate for with the clinician that you're seeing.
Yeah, and if I could put my patient advocacy hat on, and of course, we don't know all the particulars of this, but I do feel strongly that a doctor, it is not sufficient to suggest just losing weight. They have to provide you with a way. And so if you feel comfortable, you can let your doctor know that there are clinical practice guidelines that Obesity Canada put out. And treating obesity sits on 3 pillars, whether that's psychological interventions, pharmacotherapy, or bariatric surgery. But it is not acceptable for a doctor to simply say, lose weight and figure it out on your own. You can tell this really fires me up. So I hope that, I would be as bold as to say, if they're not helping you in that way, maybe it's time to find a new doctor. Mm-hmm. On to the next question. Rosie, do you have something in the chat box?
Yes, I have a question from Kathleen Budd, who asks, any suggestions for easy tracking systems to track sodium and/or fats in daily eating plans?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. So depending on what your plan looks like, if you have all the nutrients and food and all that stuff, there's a lot of software that you can kind of put those recipes in, or you can try to pull in from, depending on where you're getting it from, they may have it and you can kind of download. So there may be some ways that you can get that in, but otherwise I think you have to use something like a digital tool, like we assess, like our stuff will show sodium and many of them, like are most data sets out there, USDA, Canadian Nutrifile, they're going to have things like your fats and your sodium, MyFitnessPal, like most things will have that in there. I will say probably sodium is an area that gets much more difficult. When we did our analysis, that's probably one of the nutrients that's one of the harder ones to capture, because there's no way to tell if this is homemade or not, or store-bought, or how much fat's in there, so or salts in there. So there are some factors, as well as from fats, depending on what it was fried with, right? So there are some nuances, but I would say, and especially if you're eating a relatively small set of foods, sometimes there are many tools out there, and including the one I showed today, where you can like kind of build that meal in there with the exact recipe. And when you can get to that level of detail, or the ingredient list approximately, you're going to start getting a pretty good assessment of things like fat and sodium. And so that's kind of it. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a super easy way. We don't have a tool that just says, I'm going to measure this, which is why we're trying to get at least if we take photos, are there easier ways that we can kind of approximate these metrics for you? But like I said, I think this is an ongoing area that we need to find better tools. And the only tip I can say is if you're eating fewer meals, then you can kind of take the time to measure what those are. And then if that's covering 80% of your meals, that's probably a pretty good estimate still. And for the few times you have left, let that go, do your best then.
Just want to make sure no one wants to ask a live question. You can raise your hand electronically, or if you're struggling with that, you can unmute and say, I have a question. Okay, back to you, Rosie, for the chat box.
Thank you. There's a number of questions from people who are asking how they can find out more about the app from a doctor perspective as well as a user perspective. Can you provide a little more information on how people can do that?
Yeah, for sure. So this is something we made ourselves, and we're always trying to make sure that we're doing it safe and all that stuff. So that's why it's not, blasted out to everything. And, but I guess probably the easiest way, if you're a doctor, and I'm even fine to put my email in here for everyone, but if you're a doctor and you wanted to talk about maybe setting this up at your clinic, we can connect over email. I can send you some information. And then if if it looked good, I guess if you're a patient using it, again, there's a few things we could look at it around how the best way to get you on is. I think our biggest thing is we just want to make sure that it's safe for you to do it. So, if, for example, if you're in Ontario, your family physician could refer to me and I could just make sure it's safe and you go on. But outside of that, I'm happy to entertain. Again, you can email why you want to use it. And if it seems like it's safe, I can find a way to get you on. So I want to encourage people to use it. We just want to make sure that it's done in a safe way. So that's really it. So I'll put my email in, and anyone that's interested, just let me know if you're a patient or a physician and kind of why you want to use it. And then maybe we can figure out the best way to get you access.
Jeff, I had a question. Where do you see the future of this app going?
It's a great question. I think when we started this, it was just kind of a cool thing, this was 5 years ago. Image recognition was a bit novel still, and it was just kind of a fun bit. I think where I see it now, though, is I want it to become a fundamental part of care. We go and we get blood work all the time. We get ECGs, but we don't, and yet people are saying nutrition is important. How we eat is important. It should be in our electronic medical records. So I want this to be like a test. I can order this test and I can get this information back, and then we can act on that as a team. And so to me, I just want people to start thinking about nutrition as an important way for prevention and management of disease, and making it practical to fit into everyday practice, or maybe even an individual is empowered enough to do it on their own because this is part of it. So I think I just want to get to the point that it's every day. I get my annual, I get my blood work, I'm going to do my food assessment, and I want to get to that level of thinking of it.
Rosalind, you have a question. Please unmute yourself. Let us know where you're tuning in from.
Hi, my name is Rosalind. I'm calling from Ottawa. And Doctor, I was just wondering, earlier you mentioned the DASH diet, the Mediterranean, and the Omni diet, and I'm struggling which diet I'm going to follow. And I'm just wondering I know you would refer your patients to the dietitian, and that you can't give us the answer and say, oh, you should follow this, this, and this. But I'm just wondering, how do I decide? Do I do the DASH just because I have high blood pressure? Or do I do the Mediterranean because whatever, that's my culture? So I'm just wondering, I just have having a real hard time. And now I'm exploring keto, and I've been on this diet trap for so many years. I can't even begin to tell you, and I'm getting help, but I'm just wondering what you would tell your folks.
No, it's a great question. I think I think a lot of people have that same concept. And so I think the takeaway is the diet that's best for you to sustain. I think that's kind of the takeaway is which one can you follow. Personally, in general, I think if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, the DASH diet is certainly a valuable one. I like the Mediterranean a lot. There's a lot of overlap between the two, right? And many of these diets, there's a lot of overlap, which is, I was trying to get at what are those universal truths. If you look at these diets, they're often focusing on key aspects of, healthy grains, vegetables, good proteins, healthy fats, good fiber. Like they're all kind of different variations of that. So I think that the thing is, I want to simplify it, say, what is the right balance for me? What is the joy? Maybe I take a bit of it, mostly the DASH, but I like this food, so I'm going to throw this in. And this is, stressing those core principles of a healthy diet. I can sustain them. I like them. They're easy for me. Let's do that. Admittedly, when it gets into kind of the ketogenic diet, I tend to shy a bit more away from that. I feel like, and it's not at all for any particular, I just don't feel as comfortable. I don't know if I understand enough about when the right people. So there's maybe a few people I do it for, but if I'm not sure, I err on some of the other ones, and maybe it's just me being conservative, right? And again, there's been a lot of good success with ketogenic. So I'm not saying don't do it, but that's just kind of my take on it. But at the end of the day, do what you can sustain. And then maybe to that point, you kind of measure it and you look at it and say, you know what, I'm doing pretty well. I'm happy with this. I'm going to keep doing it. So don't get too caught up on it being exactly in this label or this box.
I think that's a good reminder what I can sustain, because, you go on these strict diets, and after 3 weeks, it's like, I can't do this anymore. So I understand that. And those are all good diets. We have a lot of doctors out there putting out a lot of good books, So thank you very much. But just one last thing. I've heard and I've read many years ago about how people who had lost 100 pounds, and one of the things that they did was journaling. Yeah. And that seems to work. It's not for me, but it did seem to work. So thank you very much for answering my question.
No problem.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah.
Great question. Rosie, back to the chat box.
Thank you. There's some questions about using apps that aren't associated with a clinician. Do we have any advice that you want to share regarding apps in general and how to navigate these types of apps?
For sure. And like I said, to come back to what we're doing, we hope that it won't always be a clinician. We just, like I said, it's part of our other, and then there's been a few cases we haven't used it. But I think if you're looking at a app, I think there's a couple core principles you want to check. First of all is privacy. So what is it doing with my data? Can they sell my data? I think, and maybe you're okay with what you're putting in there, but just be fully aware that everything you put in there might get sold to 10 different people. So make sure they have a privacy policy and understand where that's going. So like, that's one of the things we do. We're like a PHIPAA, so fully secure one, and nothing's going to get sold, but other people may. So just be mindful of the privacy. The next thing, just about the interaction with it. So is this an app that you're comfortable using? And so some people hate searching the MyFitnessPal database, because you type pizza and you get 57 pizzas and you have to pick it and it takes too long. So it has to be an interface that you're comfortable using and that you can enter data in. Because again, if you can't enter data in, it doesn't matter. And sometimes it might just be like, I just want to take a picture and write a note, and I just want to look back at my picture. So that's fine. So just figure out what you want to log, how you want to log, and what it's going to be valuable to you. So I think that's an important part. And then that kind of gets to the third point, is what is kind of the data output. So as I put things in, what am I getting back from this? And is it in the right way that I can use it to do what I want to do with it? So those are kind of the key things. And then maybe the last point is getting at the accuracy. So have they at least evaluated some measure to say, is what's coming out somewhat right? Like, or is it never been proven, or is it really off? So, that's one of the things that we think is important too, is to always be comparing this to kind of like, gold standard ways or the best ways to do things. So have some idea of how accurate this product is for you. So that's kind of some of the questions I would ask when I'm looking at a new app.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Rosie, back to the chat box, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question from Regini Jane. With so much, this diet is too stringent, I don't care for fad diets and more, I wonder what your opinion is with these diets, and how is one able to keep the weight off, because you can't be on keto forever, or can you? ?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know enough to say if you can stay on the keto forever, ever. Probably, I would think, at least I have some concerns that you can stay on it indefinitely, but that's still to be determined fully by the research community. But yeah, I think the key thing is what I actually am teaching is we want to make change, and it might take 2 years to set your diet up. But the point is, by going slowly, incremental things, taking the diet that I can change. I think, like I said, oftentimes things like Mediterranean, DASH, maybe Ornish, they have a lot of core principles. But the way I do it is let's look at your current diet and let's improve a quality measure somewhere in there, whether it be changing your protein type, changing your grain type. And let's find, what? I didn't know there was such things as teff and, quinoa and all these other grains. I'm just going to try them all and pick the one I like. And now I'm going to add a new whole grain that has good protein into my diet. And that's my first step. But I can do that because I actually can replace it with my rice, and I can do this indefinitely. And to keep making those slow changes to your diet where you enhance the quality. And again, it may not fall perfectly into one box, but it's going to get you in the principles of a good diet. And then the reason why I said 2 years is there's some research to show as you do things for longer, it's more likely to stick. So if you made this slow improvement in your diet, there's going to be a time where it's natural, and this is just how you eat. And I've definitely noticed that, over the last year and a half, I've been making changes, and without really, just by seeing this stuff, it's almost subconsciously you start thinking, and I eat less meat now, and that's just, I'm not saying there's a right answer. I just noticed I eat less meat. It's definitely less red meat. I look more to plant-based, but that wasn't anything I necessarily set out to. It's just as I see these measures and I start thinking about foods and strategies, I just get pushed in that way. So I think that's a key strategy, is don't make overnight switches and expect them to stay ever. Find those ones and work towards them and try to create that lifelong sustainable change. So that's kind of, if I could give a high level message across, rather than being too fixated on certain buckets.
Great, thank you. Anything else in the chat box, Rosie?
Getting some questions about recommendations for different types of, I don't want to say diets, but inspiration in terms of types of foods that we can eat. So for example, is there a Mediterranean diet book that you would recommend, or some information related to different types of foods that people can eat to feel empowered?
Yeah, I think, again, I think there are a couple of good books that are kind of in here, I think someone talked about the Idiot's Guide to Mediterranean Diet. I think there are so many books out there. There's also tons of websites. I generally recommend people like Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic may have Mediterranean diet sites, Diabetes Canada, Hypertension Canada. I know there's a lot of really good.
If we're doing this again.
Oops, we have somebody who's not on mute.
Yeah, so I think those are kind of some sources you get. And what I actually say is don't worry about having 1,000 recipes, but say, okay, for breakfast, are there 5 or 10 recipes I want to pick? And actually, I go through some of those recipes and I look at them and I say, okay, are these ingredients that I could keep at home? Okay, yeah. Is this something I can make easily when I'm busy? Yes or no? And then is this something I can prepare in advance and have some that I can make overnight oats and have them for the whole week? So I actually go through those measures, and then I actually rank these recipes and pick the 5 or 10 that I actually think can fit into my life, and that are kind of coming from a good source or focus on Mediterranean or whatnot. So that's kind of what I do, and I do that for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. And these are my core meals, and I know that I can work towards these and they're easy, and then I'll fill in some variety around that. But that's kind of how I've done it. I think, again, you can go through tons of these things, but the point is, how do you filter them down into, I think one study said most people 10 meals is what the around the variety that people tend to make at home. So you actually don't need to pick that many. So take the time and pick 10, maybe 15 or 20 good recipes for different meals, have them there. And then maybe every once in a while you kind of find a new one, or you replace one, right? Or you modify one. But that's kind of how I approach picking recipes.
We have a question from Corinne. Please unmute yourself. Let us know where you're tuning in from.
Hi, I'm in Ottawa, and sorry if you hear jets flying over my head. It's because I'm near the airport. I don't know what they're doing, some kind of maneuvers. Anyway, yeah, I just want a couple things I want to say, and then putting things in context. This is complicated, and it takes time. My number one priority is to live in a healthy way, and so that there are a whole bunch of factors in terms of living that way. Also, too, that stress and age are factors in all of this. So, you know, what I've heard, and these are all good things and things that I practice as well in terms of menu planning and choosing the foods I enjoy. And in logging what I eat, when I eat, and how I feel over the 3 days, what should I look for in assessing and making changes if you're saying it's over a 2-year period? So if I'm not going to use the app, let's say, and I want to do some analysis, what should I be mindful of? Or, 3 days, and then do I do it at the end of the month? Or those kind of little technical, they're more technical than they are kind of what goes inside of me.
Yeah, those are great questions. And again, I don't think there's a right answer to it. And when I say that 2-year thing, it doesn't always have to. I just think there's, I want to stress that don't make radical overnight changes that you can't stick to. So maybe you do that less than 2 years, but I just think, it's okay to go slow and to make these sustainable. So it's kind of at your pace and your motivation and other factors too. So that's it. And then in terms of measuring, it's a balance, right? Some people might say I'm going to measure every day for a month, or after a week, I get a pretty good sense of how my diet is. So the purpose at the end is like you're eating some way, right? There's a perfect number out there that tells us exactly how you're eating, right? We want to approximate how close that is, and we're going to measure it by kind of sampling it with different days of technology. And so a lot of research has done 3-day food logs. So you probably get not a bad assessment. I think by 7 days, you got a pretty good idea, because sometimes you have leftovers and you eat them for 2 or 3 days. So, sometimes 7 days is a little more representative. So I think you do 7 days, you got a pretty good idea of how you eat. Maybe you do that 2 different months or 3 different months, and, and that's going to give you a really good idea. And then I think you just have to kind of pick. And I think there are, and again, maybe this is my bias here, but there are some fundamental things that I see in these diets around, are you getting enough fiber? So I'd look at fiber. I'd look at, are you having whole grains versus kind of more refined grains in your diet? Are you having a lot of processed foods, so things where there's a lot of salt or sugar added to it? And I think, maybe a bit of your meat. Am I eating a lot of red meat? So, there's a couple kind of core things that you look for, and then you say, how do I make those changes? And that's kind of like step one. And then you may kind of tweak it from there. I need to get my doctor told me I need more calcium for my bone health. So maybe I need to find that, or whatever it is that you want to modify on top of that might depend on a bit more of that personal stuff. But I think kind of step one is let's kind of get a measure. Let's kind of make those fundamental changes. And then, we can always remeasure or tweak or finally adjust over time.
Well, I think we might have time for a quick chat box question if we have anything, Rosie.
No, just lots of thanks and appreciation for the great session.
Okay, great. Well, we want to offer our sincere thanks to Jeff for generously giving us your time today. My biggest takeaway really is, because at the beginning of this, I was thinking, I never really liked to track my food, but you have converted me, because I do see the value in collecting the data, finding the patterns, and doing those slow incremental changes over time that become a way of life. How about you, Rachel?
Yeah, I'm very similar. I tend to overmeasure things and collect data just to collect data, but I think I'm converted as well. I'm in a very remote northern limited. I don't have a huge variety of vegetables or leafy green vegetables. So I think tracking would be a really good way for me to see where I could make some changes, like more fish and other things to really shake up my daily diet. So thank you for converting me.
To get involved as a member of our Obesity Matters community, we will be sending out a survey and would appreciate you completing it so we can continue to build programs that are recommended by you, our community. Be sure to tune in to our last session of the summer series on Thursday, June 24th at noon Eastern Standard Time, where we will shift focus from diet and eating to physical activity with the session Move with Confidence. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks again.